The geopolitical landscape of the 21st century fractured irreparably in the early hours of February 28, 2026. At precisely 1:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the United States military, working in unprecedented coordination with the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, launched the most devastating regional military offensive since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The United States designated its massive kinetic and cyber offensive as Operation Epic Fury, while Israel simultaneously executed Operation Roaring Lion. The official rollout of this conflict abandoned traditional presidential addresses from the Oval Office. Instead, President Donald J. Trump announced the commencement of major combat operations via an 8-minute video posted to Truth Social at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, shortly after notifying the Congressional Gang of Eight. In this broadcast, the president delivered a direct, chilling message to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, to surrender or face certain death, concluding with a message to the Iranian populace stating, "The hour of your freedom is at hand." The strategic objectives laid out for Operation Epic Fury were breathtakingly maximalist. The Pentagon was not simply looking to send a message. The operation was strictly designed to achieve 4 core military goals: permanently preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, utterly destroying its vast ballistic missile arsenal and deep underground production sites, degrading its terror proxy networks across the Levant, and completely annihilating the Iranian Navy. What makes this conflict particularly unique is the synchronization of multi-domain assets. Before the first kinetic munitions even struck Tehran, United States Cyber Command and Space Command acted as first movers, layering non-kinetic effects to jam proxy satellite systems and plunge Iranian internet connectivity down to a flatlined 1%. This digital blinding severed the regime's command and control capabilities, setting the stage for a historic aerial bombardment. As the calendar turned to March 2026, the theater of operations transitioned into an active, high-intensity conflict with staggering statistical outputs. During the first 100 hours of the campaign, United States Central Command, CENTCOM, led by Admiral Brad Cooper, reported the systematic obliteration of over 3,000 high-value targets across the Iranian landscape. Utilizing thousands of precision-guided munitions from the air, land, and sea, the coalition effectively dismantled the IRGC's core security apparatus. The naval theater witnessed absolute devastation. CENTCOM forces damaged or completely destroyed 43 Iranian ships, including vital submarines and command vessels, effectively erasing decades of Iranian harassment operations in the Gulf of Oman. Perhaps the most critical status update of the war involves the absolute decapitation of the Iranian state. On the very first day of operations, a targeted strike killed Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, throwing the highly centralized theocracy into a blind, panicked succession crisis, while simultaneously enduring a relentless foreign bombardment. The diplomatic posture from Washington leaves zero room for de-escalation. The United States has demanded the unconditional surrender of the Iranian government. President Trump has publicly vowed that following this surrender, the U.S. will assist in shaping a new leadership structure under the banner of Make Iran Great Again, MIGA, aiming to rebuild the nation economically once the clerical regime is eradicated. However, the remnants of the Iranian state have aggressively vowed resistance, closing vital maritime choke points and placing the entire Arab neighborhood under heavy retaliatory fire. To truly comprehend the velocity and violence of Epic Fury, one must analyze the cascading failures and escalating tensions of the preceding year. The road to war was paved by failed diplomacy and the dangerous expansion of Iran's nuclear threshold. The direct precursor to the 2026 war was Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025. Following terrifying intelligence briefings, where U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff reported Iranian negotiators boasting of possessing 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, enough to rapidly assemble 11 nuclear bombs, the U.S. launched a preemptive strike. 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers dropped massive ordnance penetrators on deeply buried Iranian nuclear complexes. Despite the heavy damage inflicted, the Iranian regime arrogantly attempted to rebuild these facilities, pushing Washington toward a finalized regime change strategy. Internally, the Iranian state was already rotting. By December 2025, massive economic protests overwhelmed local security forces, culminating in a brutal state massacre hidden behind a 100-hour internet blackout in early January 2026. The US and Israel recognized this fragile, fractured moment as the optimal window to strike. The sheer volume of firepower brought to bear in Theater 1 represents a masterclass in synchronized, multi-domain lethality. The Israeli Air Force initiated Operation Roaring Lion with the largest military flyover in its history, deploying approximately 200 fighter jets, including the advanced F-35I Adir stealth fighters and F-15 IROM Strike Eagles, to drop hundreds of munitions on around 500 objectives in a single, overwhelming wave. Simultaneously, the United States projected unrivaled global reach. B-1 Lancer heavy bombers operated from RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom, while B-2 Spirit and legendary B-52 Stratofortress bombers launched from undisclosed locations to drop 2,000-pound precision penetrator bombs on deeply buried ballistic missile infrastructure. To sustain this breathtaking operational tempo, the Pentagon bypassed standard congressional oversight to expedite $650 million in crucial munitions. The most fascinating tactical evolution in Theater 1 was the integration of algorithmic warfare. Despite President Trump issuing a federal order banning the military's use of Anthropic's AI technology due to ideological disputes, CENTCOM elements actively utilized Anthropic's Claude large language model during the opening hours of Epic Fury. Operating through Palantir's data fusion platforms, Claude ingested massive streams of satellite imagery, intercepted radar signals, and drone footage to run battlefield simulations and provide human commanders with rapid, optimized target identification. This historic deployment marks the undeniable dawn of the AI-driven battlefield. The absolute pinnacle of the coalition's intelligence and strike capabilities was demonstrated on February 28, 2026, during the successful decapitation of Iran's apex leadership. For almost 4 decades, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ruled with an iron fist, serving as the ultimate authority over the military, the judiciary, and the religious establishment. When the bombs began to fall, Khamenei was reportedly sheltering in a massive, secret underground bunker situated dozens of meters beneath residential neighborhoods in the Pasteur Street district of Tehran. The regime considered this heavily fortified complex entirely impenetrable. According to Israeli military spokesperson Brigadier General Efi Defrin, the Iranian leadership was fatally mistaken. Advanced precision munitions breached the subterranean fortress, eliminating Khamenei and a host of senior military commanders, including the defense minister and the head of the IRGC. The immediate impact of this strike cannot be overstated. By eliminating the supreme political and spiritual arbiter of the state during the opening hours of a massive foreign invasion, the coalition intentionally threw the Islamic Republic into a paralyzing succession crisis, effectively severing the head of the snake while its body was still under fire. With the regime's leadership neutralized, American and Israeli forces systematically dismantled Iran's physical war-making capacity. At Tehran's Mehrabad Airport, precision strikes obliterated 16 Quds Force aircraft, severely degrading the IRGC's ability to operate an air bridge supplying cash and weaponry to Hezbollah in Lebanon. However, the most cinematic and historic moments of the war occurred at sea. In the Indian Ocean south of Sri Lanka, a U.S. Navy Virginia-class fast-attack submarine, the USS Minnesota, tracked the Iris Dina, Iran's newest 1,500-ton Mauj-class frigate. The submarine launched a single Mark 48 advanced capability, ADCAP, heavyweight torpedo. This $4.2 million, 3,700-pound weapon, carrying a 650-pound high-explosive warhead, detonated directly beneath the frigate's stern, breaking the ship's keel and sinking it almost instantly. This marked the very first time since World War II that a United States submarine sank an enemy warship with a torpedo. Sri Lankan Coast Guards rescued 32 survivors, but over 80 Iranian sailors perished in the strike. Furthermore, CENTCOM relentlessly hunted the Iranian surface fleet. U.S. forces struck the Shahid Bagheri, a massive 40,000-ton drone carrier, roughly the size of a World War II aircraft carrier, leaving the heavily modified container ship completely engulfed in flames. Additionally, the Iris Makran, Iran's colossal forward base ship, was left burning at its moorings in Bandar Abbas. In a brilliant display of psychological and tactical warfare, CENTCOM's Task Force Scorpion Strike debuted the Lucas program, low-cost unmanned combat attack system. These $35,000, 440-pound one-way attack drones were ironically reverse-engineered directly from captured Iranian Shahid 136 designs, allowing American forces to swarm Iranian air defenses with American-made retribution. The Iranian military, structured around a decentralized mosaic defense doctrine, designed precisely for scenarios where centralized leadership is destroyed, immediately activated its surviving missile units. Iran retaliated by launching a terrifying barrage consisting of over 400 ballistic missiles and 1,000 suicide drones across the region. The core strategy behind this massive counterattack was not to defeat the United States military in open combat, a mathematical impossibility, but to inflict unbearable pain on the Arab nations currently hosting U.S. bases. Tehran calculated that if the glittering financial hubs of the Gulf were set ablaze, panicked Arab rulers would fiercely lobby Washington to implement an immediate ceasefire. While the initial waves were massive, integrated U.S. and allied air defense systems, including Patriot PAC-3 and THAAD batteries, intercepted the vast majority of the incoming fire. As the days progressed, the relentless U.S. hunting of mobile launchers severely degraded Iran's offensive capabilities. According to the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, JINSA, Iranian ballistic missile launches plummeted by nearly 90% within the first week, as coalition forces destroyed an estimated 75% of Iran's mobile launch capacity. The United Arab Emirates quickly found itself squarely in the crosshairs of the Iranian retaliation. The UAE bore the absolute brunt of the drone and missile swarms, absorbing fire intended to punish the nation for hosting American combat aircraft. Within a frantic 48-hour window, over 150 missiles and 500 drones were fired toward Emirati sovereign territory. The primary target was the highly strategic Al Dhafra Air Base, a vital U.S. air combat center. On a single day, advanced air defense networks managed to intercept 16 heavy ballistic missiles and 121 drones over the UAE. However, successful interceptions high in the atmosphere generated a deadly consequence. Flaming shrapnel and heavy debris rained down onto the civilian centers of Dubai. This horrific fallout resulted in tragic civilian casualties, severe damage to luxury infrastructure, and massive, prolonged disruptions to international commercial flights, deeply wounding the UAE's carefully cultivated image as an untouchable sanctuary of global business. The sheer indiscriminate nature of the Iranian retaliatory strikes effectively vaporized the unwritten gentlemen's agreements established in 2019, which had previously allowed certain Gulf states to maintain a fragile, profitable neutrality. Most shockingly, the Sultanate of Oman was explicitly targeted. Oman has historically been celebrated as the Switzerland of the Middle East, maintaining a strict friend-to-all diplomatic posture and frequently serving as a vital back-channel mediator between Washington and Tehran. Iran's decision to strike Omani territory proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that absolutely no Gulf state was immune to the violence. Simultaneously, Iranian ballistic missiles and drones targeted the massive Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the Ali Al Salem base in Kuwait, and naval support facilities in Bahrain. This barrage forced the monarchs of the Gulf into a harsh realization. The very U.S. military bases they hosted to guarantee their security had ironically transformed them into primary kinetic targets for Iranian retribution, fundamentally shattering the established security paradigm of the region. Recognizing their conventional naval inferiority after losing dozens of ships, the IRGC turned to its ultimate trump card: economic weaponization. Iran officially declared the absolute closure of the Strait of Hormuz to all maritime traffic. As the world's most critical energy choke point, responsible for the daily transit of roughly 1/5 of the globe's crude oil supply, the closure triggered immediate global panic. The blockade was violently enforced. Within hours, the global maritime insurance industry slapped astronomical war risk premiums on any vessel attempting the transit, causing commercial shipping through the strait to plummet by a staggering 80%. The global economic ripple effects were instantaneous and devastating. Crude oil prices violently spiked to 2-year highs, threatening to trigger a severe recession across the European Union and Asia. In nations like Germany, petrol and diesel prices surged by 20% almost overnight, prompting government investigations into fuel price gouging. Locally, the Kuwait Petroleum Company was forced to implement emergency precautionary reductions in crude oil production due to the inability to export. Behind closed doors, Gulf allies expressed deep anger and disappointment over the lack of advance warning from the United States regarding the initial Epic Fury offensive, leaving them entirely unprepared to manage the catastrophic economic blowback. While the international community focused on the spectacular air war and the burning ships in the Gulf, a highly brutal and equally consequential second front erupted inside Iran itself. The remnants of the regime found themselves fighting a desperate, grueling two-front war, battling the unmatched technological supremacy of the US and Israel from above, while simultaneously attempting to crush a massive, furious civilian uprising from below. To isolate the populace, coordinate their internal security forces, and hide the scale of their atrocities from the eyes of the world, the Iranian government weaponized its telecommunications infrastructure. The state engineered a total 100-plus-hour internet blackout, with global monitors reporting that civilian connectivity flatlined at a mere 1%. Plunged into digital darkness, the streets of Tehran and provincial capitals became free-fire zones where the IRGC and Basij militias sought to terrorize the population into submission. The human cost of this internal shadow war has been nothing short of horrific. Operating under the cover of the internet blackout, state security forces unleashed indiscriminate violence against their own citizens. Human rights organizations, such as HRANA, compiled terrifying statistics. An estimated 6,800 civilians were killed directly by state forces during the protests. Furthermore, the regime swept through neighborhoods, arresting or detaining over 53,000 individuals, packing them into notoriously brutal prison systems. The government openly threatened mass, expedited executions for any protesters caught challenging the state during a time of active foreign war. Tragically, the civilian toll was also exacerbated by the fog of war. In a devastating intelligence failure, a coalition airstrike hit the Shajare Tayyebe Girls Elementary School in the southern city of Mehrabad. Archived satellite imagery revealed the school had been located within a former military complex until 2013, likely confusing automated targeting algorithms. The strike killed approximately 180 innocent girls and teachers. While the Israeli military denied involvement, U.S. military investigators launched urgent probes into the incident. International human rights groups like Dawn immediately demanded that Iran invoke Article 12.3 of the Rome Statute to grant the International Criminal Court jurisdiction to investigate the tragedy as a severe war crime. The precise, violent elimination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei created a terrifying power vacuum at the very top of the Iranian political pyramid. Fearing a total systemic collapse, the political establishment rapidly invoked Article 111 of the Iranian Constitution to form a temporary, three-member interim leadership council. Comprising President Masoud Pezeshkian, Judiciary Chief Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Senior Cleric Alireza Arafi. This council was granted emergency executive authority to manage the war effort until the 88-member Assembly of Experts could safely convene to elect a permanent successor. Behind the scenes, the powerful, multi-tentacled Larijani political family stepped into the breach as ultimate crisis coordinators, utilizing their vast network of brothers embedded in the judiciary and legislature to prevent the state from entirely fracturing under the immense pressure. Despite the brutal physical crackdowns, mass arrests, and near-total internet blackout, the spirit of the Iranian resistance found a way to pierce the digital veil. A profound, visually striking new wave of defiance flooded global social media networks whenever brief blips of connectivity allowed. The defining iconography of the 2026 uprising evolved far beyond simple marches. In an incredibly potent act of countervisuality, young Iranian women were photographed and filmed lighting cigarettes using the burning flames of Ayatollah Khamenei's official state portraits. This specific act of arson was deeply symbolic. It was a deliberate, mocking destruction of the visual dominance the regime relied upon to project its divine, untouchable legitimacy. Alongside these powerful images, the highly satirical Khamenei rat meme exploded from encrypted telegram channels onto the physical walls of university campuses, directly and openly challenging the moral authority of a regime that was crumbling before their eyes. The sheer magnitude of Operation Epic Fury ensured that its blast radius extended far beyond the borders of the Middle East, generating intense political and economic shockwaves in Western capitals. In Washington, D.C., President Trump's decision to launch the largest combat operation since 2003 without securing prior congressional approval triggered an immediate, fierce constitutional crisis. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle pushed back. Senator Tim Kaine in the Senate, alongside Representatives R. O'Connor and Thomas Massie in the House, forcefully advanced bipartisan war powers resolutions. They argued that the executive branch had dangerously usurped the legislature's Article 1 war powers, demanding an immediate halt to further unauthorized military escalation that could trap the U.S. in a permanent, unwinnable civil war. Furthermore, the staggering financial burden of the high-tech war became impossible to ignore. Defense analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, calculated that the massive expenditure of precision munitions during just the first 100 hours of Epic Fury cost American taxpayers an eye-watering $3.7 billion, averaging nearly $900 million per day in unbudgeted military spending. It was practically inevitable that a full-scale assault on Iran would ignite secondary theaters, most notably in Lebanon. Recognizing a unique strategic opportunity, while Iran's command structure was paralyzed and its Quds Force supply lines at Mehrabad Airport were destroyed, the Israeli military launched intense, preemptive strikes against Hezbollah targets in the southern suburbs of Beirut and across southern Lebanon. The human consequences of this spillover were immediate and catastrophic. Initial reports confirmed 217 individuals killed and nearly 800 wounded in the cross-border bombardments. The relentless airstrikes and subsequent IDF evacuation orders triggered a massive wave of displacement, forcing over 300,000 Lebanese civilians to flee their homes and seek shelter in public schools and universities. International relief organizations like UNICEF issued dire warnings, noting that the region's children were disproportionately bearing the brunt of the escalating trauma, facing severe shortages of food, medicine, and safe shelter. As American carriers projected power in the Gulf, Washington's great power rivals, Russia and China, were forced to formulate their responses. The highly touted strategic partnerships between Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing proved to be deeply opportunistic and ultimately limited when faced with the overwhelming kinetic reality of U.S. military might. Russia, heavily bogged down by the attrition of its own war in Ukraine, possessed neither the bandwidth nor the desire to enter a direct military confrontation with the United States. Instead, President Vladimir Putin opted for clandestine support. The Russian spy fleet, notably the MV Mensar, formerly the Beshad, operating in the Red Sea, fed critical real-time intelligence to Tehran regarding U.S. military positions and naval movements. China's response was even more restrained, revealing the distinct limits of its strategic umbrella. Beijing offered stern diplomatic condemnations but absolutely refused to provide security guarantees, instead quietly shifting toward offering back-channel financial aid and replacement missile components. In a fascinating twist plucked straight from the Cold War, shortwave radio listeners across Europe detected a mysterious new Farsi-language numbers station broadcasting on 7,910 kHz USB. Believed to be originating outside of Iran and heavily jammed by Iranian state censors, analysts suspect this Tavajo station was utilized by foreign intelligence agencies to transmit encrypted, unbreakable one-time pad instructions to sleeper cells operating in the chaos. War in the world's primary energy corridor predictably shattered global financial stability. The total closure of the Strait of Hormuz, combined with targeted strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure, caused global crude oil prices to surge dramatically to two-year highs, threatening to reignite inflation worldwide. On Wall Street, investor capital aggressively rotated to reflect the new wartime reality. Major financial institutions like Morgan Stanley noted a massive, immediate shift in equities focused toward defense contractors, aerospace manufacturers, and industrial resilience themes. Defense stocks surged as investors recognized that the Pentagon was rapidly burning through its deep inventory of Tomahawk cruise missiles, Patriot PAC-3 interceptors, and SM-3 systems. The staggering pace of munitions consumption during Epic Fury exposed critical vulnerabilities in America's just-in-time defense production model, raising severe, long-term concerns regarding the U.S. military's ability to sustain prolonged, high-intensity conflicts across multiple global theaters. As the specter of a broader, uncontrollable regional war loomed, a panicked diplomatic and civilian exodus commenced. Embassies rapidly shuttered their doors. Spain fully evacuated its diplomatic staff from Tehran, relocating operations to neighboring Azerbaijan. The United Kingdom issued stark travel advisories, warning citizens against all travel to Israel and the Palestinian territories, while London's Metropolitan Police conducted sweeping raids, arresting 4 individuals suspected of operating as Iranian spies targeting the Jewish community. The crisis also exposed deep, bitter fractures within the NATO alliance itself. Spain's prime minister unequivocally condemned the U.S.-Israeli strikes as a breach of international law, explicitly denying U.S. forces the use of Spanish military bases for the operation. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer also expressed extreme hesitation regarding the goal of active regime change. This prompted a furious President Trump to publicly disparage Starmer in the press, stating, "This is not Winston Churchill we are dealing with," signaling a severe historic strain on the special relationship. Amid the geopolitical infighting, a bizarre and highly visible symbol of the desperate American civilian evacuation emerged at Dulles International Airport. Thousands of U.S. citizens found themselves trapped in Gulf nations, contending with closed airspaces, canceled commercial flights, and a lack of immediate assistance from overwhelmed embassies. Scrambling for available lift capacity, the U.S. State Department contracted a private aviation company to execute urgent humanitarian extraction flights. Viewers worldwide were stunned to see photos released by the State Department showing terrified Americans boarding a massive charter plane, distinctly emblazoned with the logo and colors of the NFL's New England Patriots. While the sports franchise itself did not pay for the flight, they permitted the charter company that manages their team aircraft to utilize the jet for the high-stakes rescue mission, providing a surreal visual juxtaposition of American pop culture operating on the front lines of a brutal Middle Eastern war. The Middle East of March 2026 is virtually unrecognizable from the region just a month prior. The traditional pillars of stability have collapsed. The Iranian regime, stripped of its supreme leader and missing critical segments of its military hardware, resembles a wounded, cornered animal, highly dangerous and acting unpredictably. The wealthy Gulf states, once considered impenetrable safe havens for global commerce and luxury, have been exposed as deeply vulnerable to asymmetric drone and missile warfare. Analysts universally agree that the path to near-term stability is entirely non-existent. In the halls of power in Riyadh, a cold and calculated strategy is taking shape. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is closely monitoring the destruction of his primary regional rival. Riyadh officially claims a desire to avoid being dragged into the kinetic conflict, but behind closed doors, the geopolitical calculation is crystal clear. Saudi Arabia stands to benefit immensely from a crippled, defanged Iran. The Saudi leadership is poised to aggressively leverage Iran's newfound military and economic weakness to cement the kingdom's position as the undisputed, dominant hegemonic power in the Middle East. The events of Operation Epic Fury have forced a massive strategic reckoning among U.S. allies in the region. For decades, the fundamental security pact of the Gulf was simple: host American military bases and, in return, receive an impenetrable umbrella of American protection. That paradigm has fractured. The harsh realization that hosting CENTCOM assets, such as Al Dhafra in the UAE and Al Udeid in Qatar, actually transformed these sovereign nations into primary kinetic targets for Iranian retaliation, has created a profound dilemma. Gulf leaders are actively questioning the cost-benefit analysis of housing U.S. military footprints. If the presence of American forces invites destruction from suicide drones rather than deterring it, the foundational architecture of the U.S.-Arab alliance will require a total, systemic renegotiation. As the dust refuses to settle over Tehran and the waters of the Gulf remain highly contested, massive, historically consequential questions remain unanswered. First, will the United States eventually commit ground troops? Relying solely on air superiority and punishing airstrikes rarely achieves stable regime change. Without boots on the ground to secure armories, the aftermath of a falling government is historically fraught with peril, raising the terrifying specter of an Iraqi-style civil war multiplied by 3 times the population. Second, will the regime actually fall, or will it entrench? Can the dual pressures of intense military bombardment from above and a massive, courageous civilian uprising from below finally topple the Islamic Republic? Or will the IRGC successfully retreat into the mountains, seizing abandoned military facilities and transitioning into a brutal, heavily armed insurgency? Finally, what is the true future of Gulf security? Can metropolises like Dubai and Abu Dhabi ever fully restore their reputations as safe, glittering hubs for global business, while living permanently under the shadow of Iranian drones and the reality of kinetic warfare? The world watches with bated breath. The outcome of Operation Epic Fury will not only determine the fate of the Iranian people, but it will permanently rewrite the security architecture of the 21st century.